Welcome, friends. My name is Silas Ollegario, and I'm the host of Think Onward, a podcast about books, studies, productivity, and lifestyle. Now, after the intro. It's Wednesday, and that means a new episode of Think Onward. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Spotify, Deezer, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or Amazon, or I said Amazon already. Apple Podcasts. I don't know. Wherever it is, the place that you're listening this from, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I don't know where you're listening this from, and I wish we had a comment section down below so you could tell me where you're listening this from. I kind of have an idea because I can see at my page on Buzzsprout, which is the thing that manages the podcast. I can see which countries listen to this podcast, and I really appreciate for the people who take the time, 25 to 30 minutes every week, to listen to me, a random guy you probably never seen his face. And today I would like to talk about a book. A specific book, but not just talking about it. This is after some time I found a perfect book to do one thing that I've been wanting to do for a long time on my podcast, and today is the day. Today is the time when I'm going to be doing this. I'm even going to put a song, if I remember, after when I'm editing this, I'm going to put a song in the background so it gets more romantic and, Anyway, let's go. Page 1, introduction. I learned about a lot of things in medical school, but mortality wasn't one of them. Although I was given a dry, leathery corpse to dissect in my first term, that was solely a way to learn about human anatomy. Our textbooks had almost nothing on aging or frailty or dying, how the process unfolds, how people experience the end of their lives, and how it affects those around them seemed beside the point. The way we saw it and the way our professor saw it, the purpose of medical schooling was to teach how to save lives, not how to tend to their demise. The one time I remember discussing mortality was during an hour we spent on The Death of Ivan Ilyich, Tolstoy's classic novella. It was in a weekly seminar called Patient Doctor, part of the school's effort to make us more rounded and humane physicians. Some weeks we would practice our physical examination etiquette. Other weeks we'd learn about the effects of socioeconomics and race on health. And one afternoon we contemplated the suffering of Ivan Ilyich as he lay ill and worsening from some unnamed, untreatable disease. In this story, Ivan Ilyich is 45 years old, a medieval St. Petersburg magistrate whose life revolves mostly around petty concerns of social status. One day he falls off a stepladder and develops a pain in his side. Instead of abating, the pain gets worse and he becomes unable to work. Formerly an intelligent, polished, lively and agreeable man, he grows depressed and enfeebled. Friends and colleagues avoid him. His wife calls in a series of ever more expensive doctors. None of them can agree on a diagnosis, and the remedies they give him accomplish nothing. For Ilyich, it is all torture, and he simmers and rages at his situation. What tormented Ivan Ilyich most, Tolstoy writes, was the deception, the lie, which for some reason they all accepted, that he was not dying but was simply ill, and he only need keep quiet and undergo a treatment, and then something very good will happen. Ivan Ilyich has flashes of hope that maybe things will turn around, but as he grows weaker and more emaciated, he knows what's happening. He lives in mounting anguish and fear of death, but death is not a subject that his doctors, friends, or family can countenance. That is what causes him his most profound pain. No one pitied him as he wished to be pitied, writes Tolstoy. At certain moments after prolonged suffering, he wished most of all, though he would have been ashamed to confess it, for someone to pity him as a sick child is pitied. He longed to be petted and comforted. He knew he was an important functionary, that he had a beard turning gray, and that therefore what he longed for was impossible, but still he longed for it. As we medical students saw it, the failure of those around Ivan Ilyich to offer comfort or to acknowledge was what is happening to him was a failure of character and culture. The late 19th century Russia of Tolstoy's stories seemed harsh and almost primitive to us. Just as we believe that modern medicine could probably have cured Ivan Ilyich of whatever disease he had, so too we took for granted that honesty and kindness were basic responsibilities of a modern doctor. We were confident that in such a situation we would act compassionately. What worried us was knowledge. While we knew how to sympathize, we weren't at all certain we would know how to properly diagnose and treat. We paid our medical tuition to learn about the inner process of the body, the intricate mechanism of its pathologies, and the vast trove of discoveries and technologies that have accumulated to stop them. We didn't imagine we needed to think about much else, so we put Ivan Ilyich out of our heads. Yet within a few years, when I came to experience surgical training and practice, I encountered patients forced to confront the realities of decline and mortality, and it did not take long to realize how unready I was to help them. I began writing when I was a junior surgical resident, and in one of my very first essays I told the story of a man who I called Joseph Lazarov. He was a city administrator who lost his wife to lung cancer a few years earlier. Now he was in his 60s and suffering from an incurable cancer himself, a widely metastatic prostate cancer. He had lost more than 50 pounds. His abdomen, scrotum, and legs had filled with fluid. One day he woke up unable to move his right leg or control his bowels. He was admitted to the hospital where I met him as an intern on the neurosurgical team. We found that the cancer had spread to his thoracic spine where it was compressing his spinal cord. The cancer couldn't be cured, but we hoped it could be treated. Emergency radiation, however, failed to shrink the cancer, and so the neurosurgeon offered him two options: comfort care or surgery to remove the growing tumor mass from his spine. Lazarov chose surgery. My job as the intern on the neurosurgery service was to get his written confirmation that he understood the risks of the operation and wished to proceed. I stood outside his room, his chart in my damp hand, trying to figure out how to even broach the subject with him. The hope was that the operation would halt the progression of his spinal cord damage. It wouldn't cure him or reverse his paralysis or get him back to the life he had led. No matter what we did, he had at most a few months to live, and the procedure was inherently dangerous. It required opening his chest, removing a rib, and collapsing a lung to get at his spine. Blood loss would be high, recovery would be difficult. In his weakened state, he faced considerable risks of debilitating complications afterward. The operation posed a threat of both worsening and shortening his life. But the neurosurgeon had gone over these dangers, and Lazarov had been clear that he wanted the operation. All I had to do was go in and take care of the paperwork. Lying in his bed, Lazarus looked gray and emaciated. I said that I was an intern and that I'd come to get his consent for surgery, which required confirming that he was aware of the risks. I said that the operation could remove the tumor but leave him with serious complications such as paralysis or a stroke, and that it could even prove fatal. I tried to sound clear without being harsh, but my discussion put his back up. Likewise, when his son, who was in the room, questioned whether heroic measures were a good idea, Lazarus didn't like that at all. "Don't you give up on me," he said. "You give me every chance I've got." Outside the room, after he signed the form, the son took me aside. His mother had died on a ventilator and intensive care, and at the time his father had said he did not want anything like that to happen to him. But now he was adamant about doing everything. I believed then that Mr. Lazarov had chosen badly, and I still believe this. He chose badly not because of all the dangers, but because the operation didn't stand a chance of giving him what he really wanted. His countenance, his strength, the life he had previously known. He was pursuing little more than a fantasy at the risk of a prolonged and terrible death, which was precisely what he got. The operation was a technical success. Over 8.5 hours, the surgical team removed the mass invading his spine and rebuilt the vertebral body with acrylic cement. The pressure on his spinal cord was gone, but he never recovered from the procedure. In intensive care, he developed respiratory failure, a systemic infection, blood clots from his immobility, then bleeding from the blood thinners to treat them. Each day we fell further behind. We finally had to admit he was dying. On the 14th day, his son told the team that we should stop. It fell to me to take Lazarov off the artificial ventilator that was keeping him alive. I checked to make sure that his morphine drip was turned up high so he wouldn't suffer from air hunger. I leaned close and, in case he could hear me, said I was going to take the breathing tube out of his mouth. He coughed a couple of times. When I pulled it out, opened his eyes briefly and closed them. His breathing grew labored, then stopped. I put my stethoscope on his chest and heard his heart fade away. Now, more than a decade after I first told Mr. Lazarov's story, what strikes me most is not how bad his decision was, but how much we all avoided talking honestly about the choice before him. We had no difficulty explaining the specific dangers of various treatment options, but we never really touched on reality of his disease. His oncologists, radiation therapists, surgeons, and other doctors had all seen him through months of treatments for a problem that they knew could not be cured. We could never bring ourselves to discuss the larger truth about his condition or the ultimate limits of our capabilities, let alone what might matter most to him as he neared the end of his life. If he was pursuing a delusion, so were we. Here he was in the hospital, partially paralyzed from a cancer that had spread throughout his body. The chances that he could return to anything like the life he had even a few weeks earlier were zero. But admitting this and helping him cope with seemed beyond us. We offered no acknowledgement or comfort or guidance. We just had another treatment he could undergo. Maybe something very good would result. We did little better than Ivan Illich's primitive 19th century doctors. Worse, actually, given the new forms of physical torture we inflicted on our patient. It is enough to make you wonder, who are the primitive ones? Modern scientific capability has profoundly altered the course of human life. People live longer and better than at any other time in history, but scientific advances have turned the process of aging and dying to medical experiences matters to be managed by healthcare professionals, and we in the medical world have proved alarmingly unprepared for it. This reality has been largely hidden as the final phases of life become less familiar to people. As recently as 1945, most deaths occurred in the home. By the 80s, just 17% did. Those who somehow did die at home likely died too suddenly to make it to the hospital, say from a massive heart attack, stroke, or violent injury, or were too isolated to get somewhere that could provide help. Across not just the United States, but also the entire industrialized world, the experience of advanced aging and death has shifted to hospitals and nursing homes. When I became a doctor, I crossed over to the other side of the hospital doors, and although I had grown up with two doctors for parents, everything I saw was new to me. I had certainly never seen anyone die before, and when I did, it came as a shock. That wasn't because it made me think of my own mortality. Somehow, the concept didn't occur to me, even when I saw people my own age die. I had a white coat on. They had a hospital gown. I couldn't quite picture it the other way around. I could, however, picture my family in their places. I'd seen multiple family members, my wife, my parents, and my children, go through serious life-threatening illnesses. Even under dire circumstances, medicine had always pulled them through. The shock to me, therefore, was seeing medicine not pull people through. I knew theoretically that my patients could die, of course, but every actual instance seemed like a violation, as if the rules I thought we were playing by were broken. I don't know what game I thought this was, but in it we always won. Dying and death confront every new doctor and nurse. The first times, some cry, some shut down, some hardly notice. When I saw my first deaths, I was too guarded to cry, but I dreamed about them. I had recurring nightmares in which I'd find my patients' corpses in my house, in my own bed. How did he get there? I wondered in panic. I knew I would be in a huge trouble, maybe criminal trouble, if I didn't get the body back to the hospital without getting caught. I tried to lift it into the back of my car, but it would be too heavy, or I'd get it in only to find blood seeping out like black oil until it overflowed the trunk. Or I'd actually get the corpse to the hospital and onto a gurney, and I'd push it down hall after hall, trying to and failing to find the room where the person used to be. Hey, someone would shout and start chasing me. I'd wake up next to my wife in the dark, clammy and tachycardic. I felt that I'd killed these people. I'd failed. Death, of course, is not a failure. Death is normal. Death may be the enemy, but it is also the natural order of things. I knew these truths abstractly, but I didn't know them concretely. That they could be truths not just for everyone, but also for this person right in front of me, for this person I was responsible for. The late Surgeon Sherwin Nuland, in his classic book How We Die, lamented the necessity of nature's final victory was expected and accepted in generations before our own. Doctors were far more willing to recognize the signs of defeat and far less arrogant about denying them. But as I ride down the runway of the 21st century train in the deployment of our awesome arsenal of technology, I wondered exactly what being less arrogant really means. You become a doctor for what you imagine to be the satisfaction of the work, and that turns out to be the satisfaction of competence. It is a deep satisfaction, very much like the one that a carpenter experiences in restoring a fragile antique chest, or that a science teacher experiences in bringing a fifth grader to that sudden mind-shifting recognition of what atoms are. It comes partly from being helpful to others, but it also comes from being technically skilled and able to solve difficult, intricate problems. Your competence gives you a secure sense of identity. For the clinician, therefore, nothing is more threatening to who you think you are than a patient with a problem you cannot solve. There is no escaping the tragedy of life, which is that we are all aging from the day we are born. One may even come to understand and accept this fact. My dad and dying patients don't haunt my dreams anymore. But that's not the same as saying one knows how to cope with what cannot be mended. I am in a profession that has succeeded because of its ability to fix. If your problem is fixable, we know just what to do. But if it's not, the fact that we have had to adequate answers to this question is troubling and has caused callousness, inhumanity, and extraordinary suffering. This experiment of making mortality a medical experience is just decades old. It is young, and the evidence is failing. This is a book about the modern experience of mortality, about what's like to be creatures who age and die, how medicine has changed experience and how it hasn't, where our ideas about how to deal with our finitude have got the reality wrong. As I pass a decade in surgical practice and become middle-aged myself, I find that neither I nor my patients find out current state tolerable. But I have also found it unclear what the answers should be, or even whether any adequate ones are possible. I have the writers' and scientists' faith, however, that by pulling back the veil and peering in close, a person can make sense of what is most confusing or strange or disturbing. You don't have to spend much time with the elderly or those with terminal illness to see how often medicine fails the people it is supposed to help. The waning days of our lives are given over to treatments that addle our brains and sap our bodies for a silver's chance of benefit. They are spent in institutions, nursing homes, and intensive care units where regimented, anonymous routines cut us off from all the things that matter to us in life. Our reluctance to honestly examine the experience of aging and dying has increased the harm we inflict in people and denied them the basic comforts they most need. Lacking of coherent view of how people might live successfully all the way to their very end, we have allowed our fates to be controlled by the imperatives of medicine, technology, and strangers. I wrote this book in the hope of understanding what has happened. Mortality can be a treacherous subject. Some will be alarmed by the prospect of a doctor's writing about the inevitability of decline and death. For many, such talk, however carefully framed, raises the specter of a society readying itself to sacrifice its sick and aged. But what if the sick and aged are already being sacrificed, victims of our refusal to accept the inexorability of our life cycle? And what if there are better approaches right in front of our eyes, waiting to be recognized? It took me almost 25 minutes to do it, but I just read for you the introduction of what it might have been. I don't know if it might have been what it's gonna be forever. Being Immortal, a book by the Dr. Atul Gawande, and I read the introduction. This book I read it and I bought it because people say that it's a book that every medical school student or pre-med, which is my case, should read. And after reading it twice this month, I understand the reason. Having a better understanding out of how the end of life should be, or how it actually is for so many people, how different people treat the end of their lives, has really opened my eyes for so many things. And I love the fact that I decided to go into this profession, because it's not just a dream for me, it is a way of going after the thing I believed I was born for. And there you have it, Being Immortal by Atul Gawande, Medicine and What Matters in the End. Number 1 New York Times bestseller from 2007, I believe. Great, amazing book. Probably the best one I've ever read. And there you have it. Introduction read, and now maybe you're hooked. I'm sorry about my reading. It's very difficult. The position I have my microphone placed here and the lighting, it's not very... I might be giving you just an excuse, but I hope you understand. I hope you understood everything, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Kind of weird, right? But I've been wanting to do this for quite some time now. And that's it. See you on Saturday on my YouTube channel, okay? I hope you enjoy, and I hope you share this podcast with people. And remember, life can be great. We don't have to wait until the end to realize some things have been made differently. I believe we can all go through life in a way that is going to be amazing for everyone, okay? And that's it. See you on a Saturday. Bye-bye.